Tattoos and the Bible. What does Scripture really say? Ever notice how this question refuses to go away? It comes up in church discussions, it pops up in WhatsApp groups, it fills YouTube comment sections. It even follows us out of Sunday service. Some Christians defend tattoos with confidence. Others feel uneasy, but can't quite explain why. So let's set the tone clearly from the very beginning. This is not an attack on any pastor, church, or believer. No names, no targeting, no personal shots. This is a careful, honest conversation, one meant to help everyday Christians think biblically. Because something deeper is happening. The Bible, given to shape our lives, is slowly being repurposed to defend choices we already want to make. Not to transform us, not to confront us, but to approve us. Tattoos are simply the visible case study. The real issue is how Scripture itself is being handled in modern Christianity. So today, we'll examine what the Bible actually says about tattoos, where common arguments go biblically and logically wrong, and what direction Scripture truly points us toward. Stay with me, because by the end, this won't just be about tattoos, it will be about spiritual direction. Firstly, the real problem begins when Scripture becomes permission instead of transformation. Across many churches today, especially in growing urban congregations across Nigeria, a quiet shift has taken place. More believers now ask, "Can I defend this with Scripture?" instead of, "Does this draw me closer to Christ?" That shift matters. Here's the pattern. A trend is adopted first. Scripture is consulted later. A worship leader follows pop culture. A youth leader mirrors influences. A pastor makes a lifestyle decision. Then verses are gathered to support it. But the Bible was never meant to help us negotiate holiness. Paul urges believers to approve what is excellent, not merely what is permissible. Philippians 1:10. Romans 12:2 warns us not to copy the patterns of society, but to be transformed by renewed thinking. Transformation, not justification, is the goal of Scripture. And when leaders publicly defend controversial choices, younger believers often assume maturity means fewer boundaries. Confusion spreads quickly. That is why the tattoo conversation matters. It exposes a deeper spiritual posture. Now, let's unpack the common defenses believers use for tattoos and how they mirror worldly thinking quietly entering the church. Defense number 1. All things are lawful. You've heard it before. All things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. 1 Corinthians 10:23. From this, many conclude, tattoos aren't forbidden, so Christians are free. Sounds convincing. But here's the problem. The biblical error. Paul never taught freedom without responsibility. In 1 Corinthians 8:13, he says that if a lawful action causes another believer to stumble, he would rather give it up entirely. In 1 Corinthians 10:24, he adds that believers must seek the good of others, not merely personal freedom. Biblical liberty is not self-centered. It is love-governed. Once freedom is detached from responsibility, Paul's teaching is distorted. The logical fallacy committed here is incomplete reasoning. The argument stops too early. It answers, "Is this allowed?" but avoids, "Is this wise?" Christian maturity does not end at permission. It grows into discernment. Defense number 2. It doesn't cause anyone to sin. Another claim says tattoos don't lead anyone into wrongdoing, so objections are exaggerated. But here's where clarity matters. The biblical error. Scripture defines stumbling broadly. Romans 14:13 warns believers not to place obstacles in one another's spiritual path. Romans 14:20 cautions against damaging God's work over personal freedoms. Paul instructs leaders to set an example in conduct, 1 Timothy 4:12. Spiritual harm isn't only dramatic failure, it includes confusion, weakened convictions, lowered seriousness. The logical fallacy involved here is straw man. This defense assumes critics believe tattoos automatically cause major moral collapse. That's rarely the concern. Most believers are asking about influence, direction, and example, not instant failure. By attacking an exaggerated position, the real concern is avoided. Defense number 3. This is just culture or tradition. Some dismiss concerns as outdated thinking. But in many African Christian contexts, appearance still affects credibility, trust, and leadership influence. The biblical error. Romans 14:3 commands believers not to despise those with stricter convictions. 1 Corinthians 8:9 warns that freedom should not harm another believer's conscience. Scripture calls for sensitivity, not dismissal. The logical fallacy involved is false dichotomy. This argument presents only two options: embrace every modern expression or remain stuck in the past. But many believers raising concerns are not defending culture. They are guarding spiritual seriousness. Concern is not automatically legalism. Defense number 4. The message matters more than appearance. Another claim says appearance doesn't matter as long as the gospel is preached. But Scripture refuses to separate message from messenger. The biblical error. While salvation isn't based on appearance, Scripture teaches that conduct affects witness. Paul warns against actions that discredit ministry, 2 Corinthians 6:3. Jesus teaches that visible conduct shapes how God is seen, Matthew 5:16. The message is central, but the messenger still matters. The logical fallacy committed here is oversimplification. This reduces a complex issue to a slogan. Perception affects credibility. Credibility affects influence. Influence affects ministry fruit. Ignoring this weakens the argument. Defense number 5. This helps reach people. Some argue tattoos make Christianity more accessible. But here's the turning point. The biblical error. Jesus attracted people not by blending into culture, but by offering transformation. He reminded his followers they were in the world, but not of it. John 17:16. Peter calls believers to holiness in conduct. 1 Peter 1:15. The church grows by offering something different, not by mirroring society. The logical fallacy is unsupported assumption. This claim assumes outreach success without evidence. Meanwhile, public controversies often divide believers and distract them from the gospel message. Here's something crucial. Timing reveals spiritual maturity. It's not just about the tattoo, it's about when the decision was made. Pre-conversion tattoos belong to life before Christ. Grace often covers actions taken in ignorance. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Early conversion tattoos, within the first few years, often reflect developing discernment. Like the seed on rocky soil, Matthew 13, cultural pressure still hits hard. Mature believer tattoos, after years in the faith, carry greater weight. Scripture is known. Convictions should be formed. Romans 12:2 and passages like Leviticus 19:28 are no longer unfamiliar. At that stage, choices carry leadership implications. James 3:1 warns that teachers face stricter judgment. Pastors carry enormous influence. That is why believers feel troubled, not hateful, when respected leaders model questionable decisions and then defend them publicly. It's not personal, it's about example. 1 Timothy 4:12. Now, here's what Scripture actually calls us to. Grace covers, but rebellion resists. Scripture does not call believers to fear culture, it calls believers to reflect Christ. Our bodies belong to God. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Our lives are meant to be living sacrifices. Romans 12:1. So the better question is not, what can I defend, but what honors Christ? Holiness is not rule-keeping alone. It is love expressed through transformed living. So the question becomes, what should we do now? Before judging anyone else, pause. Are you using Scripture to protect comfort or to pursue growth? This week, pray honestly. Lord, show me where my life needs transformation. Correction is not condemnation. Growth is discipleship. Leaders may fail. Trends will change. Culture will shift. But Christ remains constant. If this video helped you think clearly, share it with someone who values thoughtful faith. Drop your thoughts in the comments. How should Christians balance freedom and wisdom today? Like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the conversation, because the church grows strongest, not when Scripture bends to culture, but when believers are transformed by truth. Let's pursue transformation, not just permission.